So yesterday, defund the World Health Organization, to which you had Jimmy Carter say it was he was distressed by the news. You had Bill Gates saying that it is as disastrous as it sounds. You have the head of the AMA, this Patrice Harris, saying that it's a dangerous step in the wrong direction. And you got a whole bunch of people, like me going, yeah, it's crazy. It's stupid. It's dangerous. It's moronic. It's idiotic. Go down the list. It's all of those and then some. And then you have the Trump supporters. Then you've got all the Trumpkins, people like my congressman, or I should say, the guy who misrepresents me in this district, Congressman Scott Perry, who I got to tell you, I hope loses in November, and I hope he loses badly. But he tweeted out, the World Health Organization's botched COVID-19 investigation did a huge disservice to the American people and the international community to protect the Chinese Communist government. The World Health Organization put the health of 7.8 billion people at risk. Donald Trump is spot on. The U.S. should indefinitely withhold all World Health Organization funding. And again, this has been kind of the view of the radical right for a long time. Destroy all international alliances, destroy all international institutions so that they can hold ultimate power. My problem is when they do this, we end up with people like Donald Trump who clearly dropped the ball. I mean, say what you want about what the World Health Organization did. We could argue for days whether they were proactive enough. We could argue for days whether they believed the Chinese and shouldn't have. And those are all valid conversations and all valid criticisms and things that should be addressed. But you cannot forget that this administration, for weeks, while the rest of the world was scurrying, figuring out how to protect their citizens, our administration, our government was, dismissing it. Was calling the whole thing, it's all a hoax. The Democrats want this to be a hoax. It wasn't a hoax. Their response was bad. And there's no arguing that is a hoax. That's the truth. Not that the virus is a hoax, that their response, their horrible response, is why we've had this explosion. Why we've had so many people. What is it now? 28,000 dead now in just a couple week period. And look, we still got a couple more weeks to come down off the peak. This could get a lot worse. That 60,000 number is looking probably pretty accurate. So that was yesterday. Today you have Trump saying that, since he doesn't get what he wants, since our little king dictator doesn't get what he wants, and that the Senate isn't moving fast enough to appoint his people because he hasn't been putting those folks forward all this time. Because understand, the Republicans control the Senate. So basically anybody he puts up gets a 51 vote, bang, they're in like Flint. McConnell controls this whole process. So it's interesting to me that you have now Trump's threatening to shut Congress down, which evidently he has the constitutional right to do. He has the ability to adjourn Congress, both the House and the Senate. And it's one of those things where when the two chambers disagree on when to adjourn, the president can then step in and say, well, I'm going to adjourn it, both of you. I've decided, I'm the decider guy. Evidently, no president has ever used this power, but he's looking to do it. And ultimately, the reason is he wants to throw a whole bunch of acting this, that, or the other thing into place. He wants a bunch of ideologues who can't even get past a Republican Senate, which is it's pretty remarkable to me. But we found that out today. Again, the press circus, and I'm not going to call it a press conference. It's a press circus. So Trump's little three-ring circus, that's what we got today. That was the big story out of it. out of it today. Now, the big story tomorrow, evidently, is going to be, so you can get ready for it, Trump is going to release his timeline of when he thinks the government should be, the economy should be broken open. When we start reopen everything, he's going to release those guidelines tomorrow. Because he's still miffed at the fact that 6 states on the East Coast and 3 states on the West Coast have begun to talk to each other and created little groups dedicated to deciding how each of the states collectively are going to respond as they open up, and have some reporting and do all the things the federal government should be doing but are not. That's really got him just beyond miffed. It was one of those things that I laughed at the tweet because he tweeted out that it was mutiny. It was mutiny. The fact that states, again, this comes from the States' Rights Party. The States' Rights Party are complaining that the states are deciding when they're going to open up their economy. Let that sink in for a couple minutes. And for my true believer Republican friends, check your ideology, because this you should be against. You should be dead set against Donald Trump, thinking that it's mutiny for states to look after their own. This has been their argument for the ventilators and the masks and all the PPEs and all this stuff. You're on your own, states. Go out and get it yourself. Except now he wants the power to reopen things because he understands. He really understands this could be a huge campaign boost for him. He's going to be the guy who single-handedly, against all of these Democratic governors, opens up the economy. Now, this could backfire. He's playing the game. He's rolling the dice. Casino guy who lost a lot of money in bankruptcy a number of times, but he's rolling the dice. That everyone's going to be so grateful that we get to go out and go to concerts and the state fairs, and we get to go to the movies, and we get to go back to restaurants, and we get to do all the stuff that we're now jonesing over because we're all stuck in the house. Once that happens, it's going to be a huge boost. Oh, thank you, Donald Trump. You have saved us from those evil Democratic governors and a large number of Republican governors. But that doesn't fit the narrative. Don't think about it. And they're going to be also grateful. And they got this Trump check that he finally got his name on. And people are going to thank you, Donald. Thank you, King Donald. Thank you, Dictator in Chief. Oh, thank you, sir. And they're going to vote for him in November. That's the game plan. That's part of it. All while bashing China and bashing the WHO at the same time. Problem with that, though, is if you roll the dice like they're going to try and do, and it comes up snake eyes, which means we have a boomerang effect, a second wave pops up, and again, you start seeing the kind of numbers that we're seeing in New York, in middle America. That could be bad. And not just for his reelection, but for the economy as a whole, which would plunge us right into a depression. We're at this moment where we're thinking it could be. We could be looking into the abyss of a depression, a second wave, a second shutdown that would just completely send us into a spiral. And again, this is the Republicans saying, we don't care about that. We care about money. We care about profit over people. We care about business over our seniors and over our most vulnerable. We care about money. And it's not just, it's not just Trump. Here in my state of Pennsylvania, you've got the General Assembly here. The House on Tuesday passed Senate Bill 613 by a 170 to 95 vote margin. Oddly enough, party line vote. And the Senate, 29-21, voted today. All the Republicans and the former Democrat, now turned independent, who I guess caucuses with the Republicans, John Udicek, they voted for swing the doors open. Evidently, this piece of legislation will, just for full disclosure, is to force the governor to use the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and the Homeland Security, cyber security, and infrastructure security guidelines on deciding what is critical and essential and what isn't. So when they start opening up these things, they have to use the CDC's guidelines. The problem is our governor is taking a very broad brush approach because we're close to New York. There are a lot of places in in the eastern side of the state that are basically bedroom communities for New York City and all of Jersey. So if you're in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, or if you're in the Lehigh Valley, there are people going in and out of New York all the time. So you're going to be vulnerable. So they want to swing the doors open, go ahead. And as I've said, the governor has taken kind of a broad brush approach, and we're going to shut everything down. We're going to do as much as we can to flatten the curve and tap this thing down so that we don't have to go back and do it again. And now what the Republicans are saying is, no. We should decide better. Business is more important. And the caveat here is, there's part of me that goes, okay, I get it. If I trusted corporate America to follow social distancing norms and to actually do the things to keep their workers safe, and they haven't shown me to this point that they're capable of that, I might be okay with this. I might be okay if you had an occupational safety and health administration that was fully funded and a state baby OSHA who was fully funded to make sure that people were doing what they're supposed to do, instead of pinky swearing that, oh yeah, we swear we will protect our workers, until we don't and they're disposable and we'll just get somebody else. That's my problem. My problem in all of this is what you end up getting especially poor people, the working class of this country, to get completely screwed over while corporate America continues to reap their profits. All the while not wanting to share with anybody else. So it's just one of those things. And look, as I've been saying, there's this view that, we just need to do some tweaks. We need to, we'll pay those people a little bit more to put themselves in harm's way. We'll do some things to, put up some plexiglass, and, we'll do a couple of things to lessen the risk. Problem is if it's not essential, it shouldn't be open. This kind of thought process that the Republicans, and it's not just here in Pennsylvania, it's across this country. It's the Republican Party brand of screw those poor working people. My profits matter. Greed is good. It's that mentality that's going to get us screwed over in the long run. So I'm hoping Governor Wolf vetoes the legislation, sends it back. It doesn't have the ability to override his veto. I'm hoping he vetoes it. He sticks to his plan, which is everything closed till the end of the month, and then evaluate where you go from May 1st forward. They've already canceled school in Pennsylvania for the rest of the year, which I think is the right thing to do. Now we just have to make sure that we protect the working people of our state and of the country, and also make sure that people get the unemployment when they're unemployed and the help that they need to make it through this. That is what we need to be doing. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk with a working person who, right on the front lines, one of the people we call frontline heroes. She's a home health care worker who, right there on the front line, and I'm sure worried about herself, her own health, and that of her family. So when we come back, Hillary Rothrock's going to be here to share some thoughts on her situation and what she'd like to see happen with workers across the Commonwealth. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That was the day the telephone girls, as they were called, walked out on strike against New England Bell, essentially crippling communications in 5 New England states. It was considered the most massive strike of women workers since the uprising of the 20,000 in 1909. They were members of the All-Women National Telephone Operators Department of the IBEW. Historian Stephen Norwood devoted many pages to the strike in his book, Labor's Flaming Youth. The government had taken over the nation's telephone and telegraph industries during World War I and placed it under the control of Postmaster General Albert Burleson. Just days earlier, thousands of angry women who worked in the Boston exchanges packed Faneuil Hall, demanding immediate strike action. Julia O'Connor, the leader of the Telephone Operators Union, called for the strike on this day at 7 a.m. The union demanded a 60% wage increase and full scale to be reached after 4 years instead of 7. Union and non-union alike responded to the strike call and walked off the job, establishing 24-hour picketing. On the second day of the strike, over 1,000 striking telephone operators marched through the streets of Boston and were cheered on by returning soldiers. O'Connor organized picketing around the Boston hotels where out-of-town strikebreakers were housed. Unionized service workers across the city denied services to the scabs. Postmaster Burleson smeared the striking women as unpatriotic and threatened to replace them with returning soldiers. The soldiers, however, sided with the telephone operators. After 5 days, the union won direct bargaining rights and a $4 a week raise. The strike was considered one of the few post-World War I strikes to end in victory. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So The Guardian has launched a project to highlight the lives of American healthcare workers who die because of the coronavirus. They point out that in some states across the country, it's the medical staff, those people like doctors, the hospital cleaners, people that work in nursing homes, paramedics. These folks make up about 20% of the known cases of coronavirus. So while they're saving the lives of strangers or loved ones, they're out there getting sick. They're potentially getting their families sick. And, we've heard so many stories, and it's just one of those things that finally, I think there are so many stories that it's finally hitting home for a lot of us. In fact, I have a friend in Chicago. I just found out she works for the Transit Authority out there. She has now been diagnosed with coronavirus, and she's talking about her symptoms. And she said, she didn't want thanks or pity. She doesn't want to be recognized as a hero. She doesn't want a pat on the back or premium pay for risking her life. She wants people to take this stuff seriously. She wants to stop propping up a system that abuses workers like we're seeing. And look, all of these protections should have been in place well over a month ago. All of the conditions that we're now seeing, wiping things down and now kind of caring about this should have happened several weeks ago, and yet they haven't. And in the process, what you have are working people who are going to work because we now call them essential frontline heroes, and they're dying because of it. And it's a horrible thing. Anyway, here to share some thoughts and share her story, I've asked Hillary Rothrock to come talk with us. She's a home health care worker and one of those people on the front lines. Hillary, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah. Hi, Rick. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you for covering this story.
No, this is extremely important. It's one of the things that I think, we should be spending more time on because, we're now calling people like you a hero, Hillary. And I'll tell you, I've always thought of home health care workers as heroes, the people who take care of our most vulnerable, our sick, our loved ones. But now we finally realized, hey, thank you. You're essential.
Right. We're definitely hearing that from a lot of friends and family. So thank you for that. It's been very difficult.
But here's the thing. I think you're essential every day, not just in times of crisis. And we don't lift people up and call them heroes in moments of crisis and then forget about them in the aftermath. And that's my fear of what's going to come out of this. While we need you today, hey, thanks a lot for taking care of Granny or somebody else. But after that, you don't deserve a raise. You don't deserve health care. You don't deserve a pension. You don't need any of that stuff.
I think from the things I've heard over the last few weeks and especially in the last few days, that at least in Pennsylvania, our lawmakers are taking this seriously, and we have been likened to the firefighters in 9/11 rushing into the building. However, we don't have any protection.
and that's a huge problem. And you, especially you as a home health care worker, you might say that institutions like big nursing homes, they might have access to some, but folks like you who are dealing with one or two different people, you basically are out on your own, right?
Yes, it was definitely overlooked that there are a lot of consumers and patients who choose to live within their own homes, or within a group home in the community, and they are taken care of by home health care workers who are severely underpaid and undervalued for the work that they provide. It's hard work. You're dealing with someone else's bodily fluids, several times a shift. In the case of my brother, he has what's called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he also has autism. So we have been doing this his entire life, and he's 27 now, which is really incredible. And it's really thanks to the home healthcare workers that have devoted their lives to this work. We've had people come into our home and become like family and have spent many months with us, some years, and we really appreciate them because we cannot do this alone, take care of all of his needs. So he needs stretching. He has what's called a cough assist device, which he has to basically vacuum his lungs 4 times a day. And that's brought into the home and set up by a respiratory therapist. So thank you to them as well. They're doing this work. But to my brothers and sisters that are doing this work across the nation in every hospital, I have many friends who are working on the front lines, both in New York City and in Detroit and Chicago. And they're all getting to the point of exhaustion, and we are going to need therapy. We are going to need rest. A lot of people may not be able to return to work after losing so many patients.
Yeah. No, we've heard a lot of the stories of people saying that, look, once this is over, I'm leaving the field. Because one, you see all of these horrible stories, but the fact that for the most part, they've been so underappreciated for so long and defunded for so long that in this moment of crisis, it's the pure heroism of people working 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day that we're able to maybe keep up in places like New York and Detroit. Again, disinvestment in the institution of healthcare. That's what's made this much worse.
Right. And I'm going to tell you, these young women, mostly young women, especially women of color, are showing up to help us here in our house and putting themselves at risk in case we were exposed somehow. And we have been basically quarantined since March 13th.
Right.
I went away quick that weekend, 2 hours. I did not stop going and coming either way. I was very paranoid.
No, because as you said, your brother has to have his lungs sucked out 4 times a day. This virus attacks the lungs. So given that, if he is somehow infected with this, that's the end. There's no fighting that.
Right, and we've had to come to terms with that over the last few weeks, while also having to ask 3 of our 6 healthcare workers to quarantine themselves because they were exposed. But they're showing up even though their loved ones are sick, and they need to take care of them as well. And one of our healthcare workers, love her so much, her brother died, I think it was 3 weeks ago now. And in the midst of this, so she couldn't be near her family members, and she's had to stay away just to keep coming in to work. I mean, people are really sacrificing, and she has, she's just starting out on her own. She has very little to her name, and she is here showing up for work every day for a 9-hour shift to help us take care of him. And if it wasn't for her and the local people, like the Central PA sewers who made us masks, we wouldn't have felt safe having anyone into the house, because my mother lives here, and she's 70 years old. She's turning 70, I'm sorry. And I am high risk. I've had open heart surgery due to an ASD repair. I've had pneumonia at age 12 and have lung damage from that. And I have an autoimmune disease. So I have a team of my doctors and my therapists that I turn to for my needs and to take care of myself so that I can take care of all of them. And I'm also single parenting 2 preteen girls right now in
Wow.
this house.
So
So
you've got your hands full.
we definitely have our hands full here, and we've made it through thanks to the help of friends and family who have helped do grocery shopping for us, who have made masks for us, who have sourced gloves for us. A lot of home healthcare workers, because the way that home healthcare is structured here in Pennsylvania. My brother is actually my employer, and I am paid through an agency.
Right.
So he is responsible for purchasing gloves and wipes and hand sanitizer and soap and everything we need. But when the market was flooded with people buying them all, we had no chance. And I started prepping in February. Like before anything, there was already no masks, very few gloves. I think we got like one of the last boxes on Amazon, and that's basically everyone was left to themselves, and we felt very abandoned on the front line. We had nothing. There was no way of knowing when we would ever get anything, but I made myself available to our union coordinators to step up and really let people know what's happening here as it's happening, and speaking with our lawmakers about what we need. And it really is, we're only asking for what we need, what we deserve. Nobody's asking for it to be called a hero. We're just showing up for work and doing what needs to be done on the daily.
You just want to be protected in the work that you do. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And I fully support any worker that, decided they just could not work because of the fear, because of being high risk. You can't always do the work, but I'm telling you, they are showing up and they want to do the work.
Let me ask you this, because your story is just heartbreaking, especially in this moment. What do you say to someone like Bill O'Reilly, who says that the people who are dying from this, those are people who are on their last legs, or Republican Representative Trey Hollingsworth, who said, let the economy take over, let the economy reopen. Yeah, the high death rate, that's the lesser of two evils. We care more about profit than we do people. Lieutenant Governor of Texas saying, the seniors are ready to die for our economy because they don't want to leave their kids, stuff. What do you say to that kind of flip response?
I think they just haven't been affected like the rest of us yet. And I do listen to their fear that people are going to lose their livelihood, that people are going to lose their homes, that people are going to, lose their minds and become hysterical. But that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people getting together and organizing and finding each other what we need on the ground. So as much, pomp and circumstance that anybody wants to throw at it, the reality of it and the people doing the work know what's happening and are coming together and doing what we need to do, sourcing things for each other and mailing things to each other, and just trying to do the best that we can. But I hear what their worries are. I myself was a small business owner up until June of 2018. I owned a brick and mortar store in Thurmont, Maryland, the home of Camp David. And I love that community.
Right.
But I had to move here to get away from an abusive domestic situation. And I had to let go of my livelihood, what I was building for myself, my retirement, my house, my car. And it is so difficult and humbling to lose all of that. And I totally understand where people are coming from. It's scary. But on the other end of this, a lot of people are dying from this that deserve the dignity of passing in their sleep in their own home. We found out we lost someone we knew this week due to COVID-19. He was a wonderful man who had once upon a time run for congressman. And it's heartbreaking for his family. Like, I don't even know what to say, because if it hadn't been for COVID-19, he wouldn't have died now.
Yeah.
There
No,
are
and
young people dying.
and
Like,
that's-
you can't.
No, you're right, and it's a good response. Personally, I'm outraged by people saying stupid things like that, because, as you pointed out, maybe it hasn't affected them, or maybe they're just callous. And I always suggest that if that's your view, let you be the first one to go, so we can get rid of people like you. But that's just my thoughts, so you don't have to agree with it. But when you look at where we are, especially here in Pennsylvania, where I think Governor Wolf has done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And you see that yesterday and today, both the House and the Senate passed Senate Bill 613, so they can swing things back open. Do you think the governor's gone too far? Do you think the response has been too far, or do you think it's been somewhere about right?
I think that Governor Wolf is doing an amazing job of trying to walk the middle path, because there's so many unknowns. And we really are looking at the science behind this, so that they can build policy that really helps and gets us back to a new normal. I do think that he's doing a good job in looking to perhaps Governor Cuomo because he's handling the crisis well, so people are looking to his direction.
Yeah, I think he has had a very steady hand, and I think he's had very calm leadership. I'm happy that he is the guy here in Pennsylvania that's at the helm. So last question I've got for you, because I want people walking away. We've talked about your story, about your personal experience, your brother's experience. What are we asking for workers? What do you think would help the home health care workers who come into your life, you yourself, because we need you. You have to do these jobs. We need to have you. It's not one of these things where you can say, sorry, nobody's coming to your house. We need healthcare professionals to do it. What are we asking for to help protect them?
First and foremost, we need personal protective equipment. We have nothing. I've heard from lots of fellow union members who work in facilities who don't have what they need as well, or are being threatened by administration not to speak up. And I've heard of lots of people walking off the job because of that, because it's not safe for us to be doing this job without protective equipment, just like a firefighter would not be safe going into a fire to fight it without protection and water. And, we need equal pay. The people doing this job are making on average like $10 an hour. They're making like $400 a week. And we're asking them, and they're showing up for work, but it is ridiculous. We've been fighting for $15 an hour for years now. And people need paid sick leave. They need at least to be able to be paid for the time that they have to quarantine themselves, especially if they get sick. Many of us don't have any medical benefits at all. So we can't see a doctor. We can't see a therapist. We don't have time to take off work, and unfortunately, we're also going to need rest at the end of this. We definitely need something to provide people who are showing up every day through this, who often have to quarantine from their own family members, who have to worry about who might take care of that family member should it come into the house, because we have to have strangers coming into our house every day. There's 5 other people that rotate in and out of our house on any given day. And we often don't have what we need to keep safe, like gloves and hand sanitizer, you name it. And transportation. A lot of people who do this job have to use public transportation because we only make $400 a week. So that's the biggest things that we're asking for, right? Just equal pay. $15 an hour to do this job. A lot of people refuse to do the work that we're doing. It's too hard for them. That's okay. It's not for everybody. But the people that do this job are amazing and incredible people, and we could not live our lives the way we do, and my brother would not have made it to 27 They told him 18 when he was 3 years old and diagnosed.
No, I
So-
had two cousins. One lived to
Oh, yeah.
21, one lived to 18. Both had muscular dystrophy. Now
Yeah.
this is going back, 15 years for
Right.
one and 25 years for the other one. But
Yeah.
18 and 21. So when you said
Yeah.
your brother's 27, like, wow.
Yeah. I want him to turn 28 in July. So I just want everybody to calm down, go sit at home and watch some Netflix.
There we go. How hard is that? Go sit on the couch and watch TV. Stay away from everybody.
Right? If you need water, you need food, you need communicate your needs. There are lots of people organizing to provide for you at this time, including rent help and other help. And we're working really hard to get everybody paid time off and $15 an hour and PPE because we don't have any, and they want to release everyone. And we're not ready to fight that fire
Yep,
in the
I'm with you.
hospitals, in the facilities, in the homes, in our community.
Good
So-
stuff, Hillary. I appreciate the
Thanks.
time. I wish you nothing
really
but the best. Keep
Thank
up keep up the good work and keep up the fight.
You too. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Look, an amazing story, and she's right. We need to be fighting for people to get the kind of equipment that they need, the compensation that they need. And as I've been saying, this crisis has exposed the inequality that's been building for 40 years. The question is what are we going to do on the other side of it? Going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk just about that. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that the American Federation of Teachers was founded at a meeting at the City Club in downtown Chicago. 3 Chicago teachers groups helped to organize the meeting. They were convinced that in order to improve working conditions for teachers, they would need to formally join the labor movement. In 1902, the Chicago Teachers Federation had become the first teachers organization in the nation to join their Central Labor Council. Now they believed it was time to form a national organization. The meeting was also attended by representatives from nearby Gary, Indiana, as well as New York City, Washington, D.C., and Scranton, Pennsylvania. Just a few weeks after the meeting, the American Federation of Teachers had received its charter from the American Federation of Labor. The new union grew quickly. Within 4 months, 174 locals approached membership of 10,000 educators. But then came a backlash from school boards who did not want to negotiate with the new unions. Board members publicly called into question whether it was appropriate for teachers to unionize. The American Federation of Teachers numbers fell to below 5,000. But the union was not swayed from their cause. They renewed their efforts and again began to grow. In the 1950s, some teachers became the targets of anti-communist hysteria. This highlighted the importance of having a union to protect academic freedom. The 1960s was a time of increased teacher actions and strikes. The American Federation of Teachers more than tripled its membership from 60,000 to 200,000 by the end of the decade. Today, the American Federation of Teachers represents more than 1 million members across the nation. While under increasing attacks, teachers are an important force in today's national labor movement.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I'll tell you, when I hear Hillary's story, it's one of those things that just enrages me, that we put workers in this kind of situation where they're doing vital work, they're doing heroes' work, but we're giving them none of the tools to help protect themselves. And she hit on something that I don't think is getting enough attention, this idea of protecting people who might not be able to pay their rent or might not be able to pay their mortgage. And, as I put out today, who's getting their stimulus check? And, a number of people have said, hey, I got it or I didn't get it. And I asked, what are you doing with it? And most people are paying their bills, paying their rent, paying their mortgage, as you would expect. I found nobody who said, I'm going to go and I'm going to save it for a party. Because look, the vast majority of working people in this country, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're just getting by. So for me, the $1,200 helpful. There should be another one coming the day after, and we should be making sure that people are able to collect and pay their bills, so that on the other side of this, we're not worse off. And as I've been saying, look, I want to know what the economy is going to look like on the other side in the post-corona economy. That's why I've asked Maurice Weeks to come talk with us. Maurice is the co-executive director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy, ACRE. Maurice, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
So, I've been focused on this, well, starting with the help for renters and people with mortgages who might fall behind, which we've got to do something about. But I've been focused on this idea of, what's it going to look like on the other side of this? What are we going to fight for to make sure that the next crisis doesn't put us right back or even worse than we are now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it has, the answer has a lot to depend on what we do in the next couple of months. With this last stimulus, the folks who got the $1,200 check, in most places in the country, that's not enough to cover a month's rent. And, there was a little bit of assistance for renters in that landlords who have Fed-backed mortgages can't do evictions right now. But I'm not sure I would trust my landlord to tell me if they have a Fed-backed mortgage or not. So I think lots of folks are still at risk. And even after the 90-day window that they put in for mortgage suspensions, I think we're going to see a lot more foreclosures too. So I think with the next stimulus package that comes up, it'll determine what the economy looks like after. Are we going to see thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people who were recently evicted and homeless and out of work for months at that point, maybe over a year? Or is Congress going to give us something that is actually real relief for people who are struggling and, just like you're saying, just trying to pay their basic bills and stay in their house? So I think it has a lot to do with what the next couple of months looks like.
Yeah, I go back to 2009 when President Obama took office, and the economy was the bottom fell out of it, and we were in free fall. And a lot of the things that I advocated back then, we're talking about now, which I think is a great thing, and we actually have a chance of moving forward on some of those things. Because look, over the last several years, there have been a number of groups like yours that have been organizing around the idea of a more just economy, a more fair economy, and making sure that when these crises hit, we don't just kick people out of their jobs and out of their homes, so that people like Trump and the wealthy can come back and scoop it all up, but to actually have sane, rational policies that are worker-centric.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, one of the things that our organization, along with many others, has been pushing is for a homes guarantee. And, it may sound like sort of a lofty pie in the sky thing, but, you can change your perspective and say it's actually kind of ridiculous that we don't make sure that every person in this country has a roof over their head. It creates for public health disasters, as we, have seen in several cities have acknowledged that by taking hotels and letting homeless people stay in the hotels during the current crisis that we have. So we've been pushing for a homes guarantee as a long-term solution to the housing crisis. And one of the ways that would just keep the instability in the economy, which comes from a lot of people just not knowing if they're going to be able to make their rent or their mortgage payment month to month.
Yeah, I go back to the great collapse, the last Republican collapse back in 2009, 8, 9, 10. And I remember, working with the Home Defenders League. I don't know if you remember them, but they would basically have people fill up someone's house who was being foreclosed so that the sheriff couldn't throw people out because they wanted people to stay in their homes. And I was saying then it's idiotic that we're throwing people out of their homes by the millions and then having all of these abandoned homes. And I hope we learn the lesson from that, because I go back to where I grew up in Cleveland. There's a ton of abandoned homes still
Absolutely.
to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see the same thing. I'm based in Detroit. I see the same thing. Lots of abandoned houses. Rick, I look at situations like what happened in Oakland, where there were a group of homeless mothers who were, they were out on the streets with their kids. They find a house that's owned by a huge investor. That is often the case in many, many big cities, sitting empty, perfectly livable. There's nothing wrong with the house, just sitting empty. The investor's just sitting on it, holding it. And they move into the house. These homeless moms move into the house Name it, name their campaign Moms for Housing. And what an image to have the sheriff come and push these mothers out of this house that they've seized, just to make sure that it remains vacant. I mean, how silly of a system do we have that we're using the police to push out homeless folks from a house that no one is using? So that's just another underscore to why we need something like a homes guarantee and a broad scale solution to this housing crisis that, frankly, we were facing before Corona ever hit our shores.
Right. Someone sent me, I guess it's been about a week or two ago, sent me a picture from Las Vegas of, I guess, the asphalt parking lot. Maybe you've seen it. They painted lines on an asphalt parking lot for homeless people to be able to social distance in these things. When you go, nobody's coming to Vegas, and you've got thousands of hotel rooms.
Yeah. No, it's really disgraceful, and I think it points to a larger thing in what's happening in the current economy, and something that we really need to change if we're going to have a just economy moving forward. Which is, there's a class of folks, and very often billionaires and private equity executives and hedge funders and corporate CEOs who really are willing to protect their wealth and the image of their wealth at all costs. So of course it makes more sense to move all of those people from the parking lot into these enormous empty hotels that are in Las Vegas. But what would that mean for these billionaires who own the hotel's image? That's what they're worried about. And I think that we really need to get past the myth that these are the kinds of people who make the economy better. And really, these kinds of people extract money from the economy. The billionaires, corporations, hedge funds, private equity groups, they're the ones who have extracted so much money from the organization, from the economy, that groups are having a really, really difficult time dealing with the fact that people are now out of work, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Hedge funds are one of the things that makes it more possible, which is terrible.
But it always comes back to the war between labor and capital, doesn't it? Between
Absolutely.
the moneyed interest and that of the workers. And a perfect example to highlight your point is Philadelphia. Hahnemann Hospital, a private equity guy, closed down Hahnemann Hospital at a time when we have a crisis and is not willing to give it up. If I'm the mayor, if I'm the governor, I seize that damn hospital and I open it up immediately.
Absolutely. I mean, the owner of that, who's a finance guy, he demanded $1 million a month for them to use the hotel. And I'm like you. If I'm the mayor of Philadelphia, if I'm the governor of Pennsylvania, heck, if I'm in the federal government, I'm making sure that hotel, which is perfectly fine and can be used to treat patients, is used no matter what. And, he can take his request for $1 million and keep it. Like, there's no way that we would pay money to use what should be a public health resource. But that just shows you the type of how they treat the economy and how they treat sort of everyday people.
Yeah, but Maurice, the other part of this to me is not just these greedy private equity guys, these financiers. It's the fact that we have allowed some of the things that we used to hold dear as a society, as part of the commons, to be privatized. And a hospital, in my view, should never, ever, ever, never be in the hands of a private equity or a hedge fund or a billionaire. Never.
Totally. The other thing that leads me to is, how we're actually doing medicines and vaccines in this country. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of the research that goes into creating something like the vaccine that we're trying to create for the coronavirus, or even just a typical medication like something for heart disease or something like that, a lot of that's done through public research. It's things that we all fund as taxpayers. It's things that are done at public universities. And then we've set up a system where we take all of that knowledge and hand it over to a huge pharmaceutical company who then gets to patent it for years and charge whatever they want. Now, that seems like a pretty silly system to me. If we're doing all of the research publicly, wouldn't it be great if we could also develop those medicines publicly and make sure that everyone gets access to them? I really worry that when the corona vaccine is finally produced, that it's priced so high that it's very difficult for people who are poor or working class. It's the same people who are really maintaining the economy at this moment, the types of folks that we call essential workers. I'm worried that they won't be able to afford the vaccine because of how we do medicines in this country. So again, pointing to the way the economy is structured, just not working for working class folks.
Yeah, not to sound callous, but isn't that the point? Isn't the point to get rid of?
No,
And you
yeah.
may laugh. Look,
No,
and-
I think that's totally right. Yeah, I mean, we in this system, we've seen it over and over and over again for hundreds of years at this point that this isn't a flaw in the system. It's clearly working efficiently, and that means that working class folks like my family, like millions of families around the country, are suffering. And that's a real shame that's true. And that's why my organization works with so many labor locals and other community organizations that really have folks, especially now, putting everything on the line to make sure that out of this crisis comes a new system that deems it unacceptable, all of the things that we're talking about, all of the ways that we're dealing with homelessness, the ways that we're dealing with medicines. Folks are putting their lives on the line to make sure that those things change, and that's the hope I get. Even though you're totally right. That's the way the system was set up.
No, I mean, and this is the scary part, because you've got our fearless leader who says everyone should wear masks, only I'm not going to do it. And it's kind of the message that he says, this doesn't apply to me or people like me. It's just you people down on the bottom. And what he means are, those people who are now patting on the back, calling essential, calling, frontline heroes that we refuse to pay a living wage to, that we refuse to ensure that they have health security, that we refuse to make sure that they have retirement security. And, oh, by the way, we're not really doing all that great of a job at providing a safe workplace. It just seems like part of the plan.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that, that message, whether the president likes it or not, gets passed down to millions of people who are in his base. So even if he's saying, you should wear a mask, but I won't. I'm in Michigan, and today, like, a bunch of folks were protesting at our state capitol with no masks. Hundreds of people got out of their cars, were standing close to each other, demanding that the state be reopened back up for business. I mean, with MAGA hats on, with Keep America Great hats on, with Trump bumper stickers. This is the kind of thing that filters down, whether he thinks so or not, all the way down to all of his supporters, and puts us all at risk and makes the economy even more difficult to pull out of this mire that it's in. I wish over and over again that we had an adult at the helm here, because those kinds of things obviously wouldn't happen.
That's the scary part in all this, isn't it? And look, I wouldn't mind if they were the ones just getting sick. Not to sound callous. If you're stupid enough to put yourself in that, maybe you deserve it. But the problem is it's going to make it worse for the rest of us.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Detroit is an old city and a black city. And, I've been telling friends, I've been hearing ambulances, once an hour at the very least for the past week and a half. And people think that I'm being hyperbolic, but I mean, literally, I hear ambulances once an hour. I mean, so, folks who are asymptomatic, even if you don't think that you're sick, getting other folks sick, and lots of people are dying here. This is a really, really serious situation, and serious for our economy too. Like, we have to make some good decisions here to be able to move forward in a way that makes sense.
The last question I've got for you, in looking at the CARES Act and all of that, was it enough? Do you think? Do you think it was a good first step? Where do you put the CARES Act at this point? Because I'll tell you, I think it's historic in the fact that it did give a little bit to working people, unlike any of the bailouts that I've ever seen in my lifetime. This is the first time that I've actually seen there to be some concern about the average everyday working family.
Yeah, no, I think that the fact that there was actual payments to folks at $1,200 and $2,400 or more if you have children, and some things for workplaces, some things for mortgages, et cetera. All of those things are historic. But when I look at the overall economy and what needs to be done to actually really at this point stave off depression and keep working class people from starving and being homeless, we've got a lot more work to do. And I think the next 3 or 4 months calls for a way bigger stimulus. And I hope that the federal government really gets on it.
I'm right there with you. Maurice, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Keep up the great work that you guys do there at Acre. And I hope you'll come back and share with us at some point in the near future.
My pleasure, Rick. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Maurice Weeks. This is one of those things. And as I was saying, this is one of those moments where you just go, honestly, what has to be done is we got to stay home. Simple. And what's interesting is, again, to bring up something that Maurice hit on, the woman who I really like to be, Biden's number two, the governor there of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who I like a lot for the VP choice. Evidently, as he pointed out, there was a big protest, Operation Gridlock, where a bunch of these conservative groups, Michigan Freedom Fund and the Michigan Conservative Coalition, they all wanted people to come out and basically jam up the Capitol. Bring your car, jam up the Capitol. But this is the part that got my attention. They said, don't park and walk, stay in your vehicle. It's almost like, even as dumb as some conservatives can be on this issue, they were even saying, we might not want to get us sick. So, stay out of the crowds, just stay in your car, cause some noise, because this is our political issue. We just want to make this Democratic governor look bad. We just want to get on the news. We want, our voice heard, our picture in the paper, that kind of stuff. But, on some weird level, even they get, as ridiculous as they are, even they get that this is serious. Now, did any of those people listen? Not a lot. Because as he pointed out, a bunch of them jumped out of the car and they were, a big crowd of people. I guess they put the number at about 1,000 who showed up. But here you have all of these people defying the government because freedom. It's crazy. And again, against their own best interest. And of course, in the crowd, you heard lock her up. Now the chant will go to lock up the governor because she had the audacity to want people to be safe. How dare she? Seriously, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. But it's where we are. It's the world in which we now live. And look, I know some of these people. I know the people who would show up and they're, we need to reopen things. I don't care if I get sick, because, they all think they're Superman until it's them. So all of these people who are saying, you know what, if a bunch of people get sick and die, keep the economy going. That's what's really important. Well, let it be you. Let it be your wife and kids. Let it be your loved ones. The sad, weird part about it is, it's not. These wealthy types, they've already blocked themselves off. They've already quarantined themselves. They're not going to get it. It's just you and me, the essential workers, who, when this is over, will be long forgotten. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
As Lyndon Johnson used to say about special interests trying to get his support to pass some blatantly self-serving legislation, they can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Yet, chicken shit is all that the corporate health complex has to work with, as it frantically tries to defend its current system of mass malpractice known as corporate health care. After all, as most Americans have learned the hard way, the corporatized care of profiteering insurance giants, big pharma, and hospital chains grossly overcharge us while constantly trying to shortchange or outright deny care to millions of our families. So, unable to win public support on their own merit, the corporatists and their hired political hacks are going all out to continue their gouging and keep control of America's dysfunctional system. They're now running a multi-million-dollar PR and lobbying campaign of lies to trash and kill all reforms that would deliver quality, comprehensive care to everyone at far less cost than they can deliver. Masquerading as a partnership for America's healthcare future, The profiteers warn ominously that such reforms as Medicare for all or a public option for health insurance would take away people's choice and our control over health care. Hello, we presently have no choice or control. Our care is managed by a handful of insurance, drug, and hospital monopolists whose primary objective is not improving our health, but feathering their own cushy nests. And the undeniable ugly truth is that they can only continue ripping us off by killing real reform. This is Jim Hightower saying that's one reason the American Medical Association and others are dropping out of the partnership's political front. Honest healthcare practitioners no longer believe it's in their interest or the public's to be part of its chicken PR campaign.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So anybody who's listened to the show knows that I'm not a big fan of charity. I'm distrustful of the billionaire philanthropist. I'm distrustful of their motives. And look, they may have the greatest motives in the world. They may really care about poor children. They may care about education. They may care about healthcare. At the end of the day, a lot of it comes back to one, being self-serving, two, being it's whatever their little pet idea is, and we then exclude people. I've always been of the mindset, charity, local charities to do little things around the neighborhood, great. But on the big picture, we need a federal response with tax dollars that are committed to taking care of it and not having a bunch of waste. So when I saw this story about Bill Gates' charity paradox over at The Nation, I said, you know what? This is something that I would like to talk about. That's why I've asked Tim Schwab to come talk with us. He's a freelance journalist. And he's got a great piece, as I said, the Bill Gates charity paradox over at The Nation. Tim, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rick. Happy to be here.
So, as I said at the start there, I'm not a big fan of charity. I'm generally distrustful. I think we could probably do things a lot better way. But I know I'm not allowed to go after Bill Gates and say anything bad about him.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Why aren't you allowed to go after Bill Gates? How come nobody ever says anything bad about Bill Gates?
Well, I would argue because he's doing such wonderful work and he cares about the children.
Yeah, well, there certainly is an impression. I mean, I think you teed up some of the complexity and the nuance in your opening statements. You know, it is hard to paint him with a brush as being a villain or there's anything bad. But at the same time, there are all these complicated ethical issues when you have a billionaire, even if he seems to be doing good deeds, to have as much influence over public policy as he seems to. And I think you see that right now with coronavirus, where he's become like a de facto public health authority in this crisis.
Well, here's the other part of that, and look, I'm not a Gates fan, but the sad reality is people are at this moment listening to him because I would argue, you don't have to agree, but I would argue our president is so dysfunctional. So people are looking for some leadership from somewhere. And if it's going to come from a billionaire who seems sane and rational at this moment, sadly, that might be, even though he's a guy who didn't vaccinate his own kids, from what I've heard, I guess that's where we get our information.
Yeah, I don't know about him not vaccinating his own kids. I find that hard to believe, but I don't know about that. But I think there is a sort of power vacuum happening right now where people are looking for an authority, and Bill Gates seems very happy to play that role. Even though he's not a medical doctor, he's not an epidemiologist, he's never been elected for public office, not a public official, but nevertheless, here he is doing long-form interviews with Anderson Cooper on CNN or Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, publishing op-eds everywhere from the Washington Post to the New England Journal of Medicine. And the larger effect of this is really, I think, normalizing his exercise of power, or more generally, the way that billionaires and billionaire philanthropists, the kind of role that they play in public policy debate.
Right. And as you pointed out in your article, Mike Bloomberg decided that he was going to run for president. And I argue that, he ran specifically to ensure that Bernie Sanders didn't get to be president. And he used his money, to run attack ads and to do all kinds of things. And that was his attempt to influence things. And the people, resoundingly said not all that interested. But Gates, as you point out, doesn't bother with the politics. He's got the soft influence of charity, and who's going to mock somebody for charitable works? It's out of the kindness of his heart, after all.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say, Bill Gates has a lot of life to live. He's I think he's 64, maybe he's 65 years old now. Melinda Gates, his wife, who's his co-trustee of the Gates Foundation, she's still in her 50s. So there's plenty of life for the Gates to live in terms of if they ever want to pursue a political career. Certainly either one of them, I think, would be very well placed to run an aggressive campaign. So I don't know that we can totally count them out. But to your point, you're absolutely right. They don't need to be an elected politician to exercise power, and we see that in all the work that they do as philanthropists.
Now, my problem again is you look at these big foundations and these big charities that usurp public policy, and one of the areas that I talk about is education. I look at how they've gone and pushed for charter schools, and whatever the theory du jour is, whatever the silver bullet to fix our failing, especially inner city public schools, they come up with these ideas, and then they get all their billionaire friends and corporations to kick in, and it generally turns into what we've seen in places like Philadelphia, a big pot of money going into something that's not working, that they're getting huge tax breaks out of.
Yeah, and I feel like, that message doesn't come across as often or as loudly as it should. And I blame in part, I think, the news media, which hasn't really done a good job. Journalists are great at these headlines that scream, a $10 million donation from the Gates Foundation. But they're less good at reflecting back, a year or 2 or 5 years later, reflecting back and say, well, what did we accomplish with all this? What were the merits or the drawbacks of this? There just hasn't been enough kind of public scrutiny around that. That's from journalists, but I think even from government, you just don't see that happening.
Well, I would argue the outsized influence of their money. I mean, especially in the media structure. Where their ad dollars mean so much, their corporate influence means so much. So if you've got all of these companies, all the pharmaceutical companies and all the entertainment companies who are kicking in money to whatever the latest great idea is, if you badmouth that latest great idea, you might not get their advertising dollars.
Yeah, that's part of it. I have a piece coming out in Columbia Journalism Review that looks at the Gates Foundation actually directly funding media and journalism also. So, in the story I did for The Nation, I took a look at all 19,000 charitable grants the Gates Foundation has given over the last 2 decades. In that piece in The Nation, I'm really looking at they're giving to private companies. But a separate analysis I did, which I just tee up briefly in The Nation, is this idea of $250 million going to the news media and journalism. So a lot of the news outlets that you probably read, Rick, that your listeners look to for news, a lot of them have taken money from the Gates Foundation. I'm talking everywhere from Al Jazeera to ProPublica. So these are our mainstream top-tier news outlets, journalism institutes, media companies that are taking funding from the Gates Foundation. So if we're looking at ways that there might be biases or blind spots in the news media, I think we have to include that on the list as well.
Oh, absolutely. And look, my favorite punching bag used to be the Koch brothers and the money that they gave around to people because they spread it around. You give them credit. They took their billions and they spread it around to everyone. And I always love to point out that Florida State University, the one year the story came out, and maybe you've seen this as well, got $2 million from the Koch brothers. And for that $2 million, the Koch brothers got veto power over any economics professor hired by the university. And you go for a measly $2 million, which you and me, it sounds like a lot of money, but to a university the size of Florida State, $2 million isn't a whole lot of money. And to give that kind of outsized power is just insane. And this is what happens, in my view, and you can agree or disagree, that when you have these people who have such enormous wealth and you starve institutions, be it the media, be it education, healthcare, whatever you're going to name, you create this Hunger Games scenario where they have to go begging to people like the Kochs, like Gates, like Zuckerberg, name the billionaire, and you're going to find somebody who's trying to, beg a couple of bucks off of them because the tax dollars have been so squeezed off.
Yeah, and I think the Koch brothers is an apt parallel to bring in. You know, it's easy for a lot of us to vilify, Charles Koch or the Koch brothers because the way that they use philanthropy is seen as being so egregious, and because it's been studied and reported on fairly well. With the Gates Foundation, I feel like there's this aura or this halo surrounding it as really kind of a more purely charitable enterprise.
Right, it's apolitical.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, your listeners are way more savvy, but I think I worry that a lot of people sort of naively see the Gates Foundation as just that, as apolitical, as not having an agenda, as just giving money away indiscriminately to help the needy. But we have to remember that, at the top of the Gates Foundation is Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett. And they clearly have an idea, a worldview of how the world should work, and they're using their philanthropy to bend the world in that direction. So we can't pretend like they are apolitical or they don't have an agenda, because if we do, then, we're not seeing the Gates Foundation for what it is, which is a structure of power, which needs to be challenged.
No, absolutely. And, this has always been my argument about these philanthropic organizations or these people who have enormous wealth. I've always been of the mindset, look, do we need education? Yep. Do we need healthcare? Do we need, go down the list. Then we tax the very wealthy, as we did during the good socialist years of Dwight David Eisenhower. And we pay for our wars, we pay for our infrastructure, and we do the things that we, the people, need without begging, without pleading to a billionaire class of, oh, please give us some charity.
Yeah, in taxes, Rick, I think is such a core issue in this whole debate about philanthropy. I try to explain this in the article, and it's something that I don't think I totally had my mind wrapped around when I started this project. But something like 40 or 50 cents of every dollar that Bill Gates gives away is actually your and my dollar. It's
Yep.
the taxpayer's dollar. It's money that Bill Gates otherwise would have to pay in taxes, but he's able to avoid those taxes through charity. And once you start to think about billionaire philanthropy in that way, that it's heavily subsidized by taxpayers, then you start to see, we all have skin in the game here. Why isn't there more accountability about how Bill Gates is spending this money if it's partially our money?
Exactly. I have a fairly wealthy uncle who gives enormously to the Catholic Church, and he's and I kind of mock it. Why are you giving them all this money? They don't need it. He goes, well, half of it's yours. He's very honest about it, which is kind of ironic, but he writes it off, and it's part of that's how the game is played. And this is why I've always said we need a much more progressive tax code that doesn't give tax breaks for charity. If you want to do charity and you think it's a good thing, then you should give money to it. We shouldn't be subsidizing it. I think if you want to give money to any organization, you should be able to do that. But I shouldn't have to, and the rest of us shouldn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, in my article, I talked to Chuck Collins. He works for the Institute for Policy Studies on Economic Inequality Issues.
Yeah, we've had Chuck on the program a number of times.
Okay, great. Yeah, so around the year 2000, he was working with Bill Gates' father, Bill Gates Sr., on a national campaign to support the estate tax, which Congress was thinking of weakening or getting rid of. But he said that Bill Gates Sr. had a kind of nuanced view that, just kind of marveled at the fact that his son was going to give away over his lifetime $100 billion, whatever the number will end up being, and never pay taxes on that money. And Bill Gates' dad was of the mind that, you shouldn't get an unlimited sort of tax savings if you put your money into charity. There should still be a cap. Maybe the first, I don't know, what's fair, $50 million, $1 billion to get some kind of tax break on that. But everything after that, why do you get a public subsidy for it?
No, and I'll tell you, I'm so glad to hear that there are other people out there, because I usually get, when I say that we shouldn't be subsidizing these philanthropic groups, especially because Gates is one of the ones that him, Zuckerberg, the rest of them, I usually get attacked by somebody, and I'm sure I'll get some here. He's such a wonderful man. He's so caring. He does all these wonderful things. And look, I'm sure his heart's in the right place, but a lot of the policy I don't agree with.
Yeah, and And the reality is also, I mean, to talk about making some of these kind of changes, like on a congressional level, is going to be difficult because the billionaire philanthropists have their own kind of special interest groups now. I talk about one in the article I wrote for The Nation, the Philanthropy Roundtable, which is getting money from the Gates Foundation, and it's getting money from the Charles Kochs of the world. And it's going to push back on any kind of regulation you have of philanthropy. Their goal is to protect and defend wealthy people's ability to give freely with, major tax savings, to give anonymously even. And so you have these kind of advocacy groups and lobby groups that are springing up to defend the practice of philanthropy from public scrutiny, from regulation. So it is kind of it's becoming a more and more entrenched structure of power, and I think that's kind of incrementally happened without much public scrutiny or public debate.
Yeah, and you got to wonder where those advocacy groups are popping up from, and where the money's coming from to fund all of those advocacy groups, to defend their right to shade a bunch of money from taxes by doing philanthropic work. You kind of got to wonder.
Well, we know where it's coming from. It's coming from Charles Koch and Bill Gates.
Of course it is. That's why I was being a little sarcastic, because they've learned they've learned that in the charity sector they can do what they did in the political realm with the Heritage Foundation and ALEC and all of their think tanks and the State Policy Network and all of the infrastructure and institution that they built to be able to influence our actual policy. They can set up a shadow policy government kind of by doing this stuff, by just doing and usurping our entire governmental process in the interim.
Yeah, I mean, you probably heard today Trump is talking about, if I didn't misread this in my sleep-deprived state, he's going to stop funding the World Health Organization.
Right.
I mean, Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation is the second largest funder of the World Health Organization after the United States. So if Trump does pull funding, that would make the Gates Foundation presumably going forward the largest funder of the World Health Organization. I mean, even as the second largest funder, they're exerting great influence over the direction and the work the World Health Organization does. But as just kind of one illustration of the power that they exercise on a global level,
leads you to the question of should he have that kind of power? And in a democratic system, I mean, a constitutionally limited democratic republic, do you want to have one person have a greater voice than 320 million?
Right. And where does that power come from? It comes from simply because he's the second wealthiest person on earth. I just don't understand how we got to that point, but that somehow we've kind of, I guess, lost track of the fact. Like, we want to see him as this charity worker and philanthropist, but I think we really also have to see him as a multi-billionaire and one of the richest people that's ever walked the earth.
Yeah, but again, it comes back to we're in this position because we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to trust those kind of people and those institutions over our own government. I mean, we've been trained to think anything done by we the people through our government, the public sector, is bad. You think government bad and you start to drool and get rabid at the mouth, but anything private, that's good. It's not fraught with waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's well run and it has good intentions. Only that's nowhere near close to the truth. But the way we get to think about that is because there is no oversight. There isn't governmental hearings to pick every bit of this apart. We don't get to see that on C-SPAN. As I argue, we should. We should have corporate boardrooms on C-SPAN.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you absolutely, Rick. There is this kind of constant mythology about the private sector being more nimble and more efficient, and they can do things that the bureaucratic government can't. And, Bill Gates has started this thing called the Giving Pledge, which some of your listeners may have heard, where they're trying to encourage the wealthiest people on earth to give away most of their wealth during their lifetimes. And some of the people who sign up for the Giving Pledge are very explicit that they see giving money as a philanthropist as an alternative to giving money to the lumbering bureaucratic government, taxes. They're saying, why would I do that when I can put my money towards to groups and agenda items and policy issues that I care about and that I can manage myself as a private citizen.
And I can have direct control over.
Yeah, but it's an incredible amount of privilege that we're giving the super wealthy to give them that choice to say, well, am I going to pay taxes or am I going to start a philanthropy, which, is working in parallel to government and influencing government policy and public policy. Why is that fair that we give the wealthiest Americans that ability to do that?
No, I'm right there with you, and which was my position's always been, hey, if you want to give money to charity, great. No tax deduction for you, none whatsoever. And I think that across the board. You want to fund religion, God bless you. We shouldn't be giving tax deductions for that either. Pay your taxes like everybody else, and if you want to fund those things, great. But it shouldn't be part of our tax code. And that's where I think we have to have this conversation around taxes. So I guess last question I've got for you, where do you think we should be going with this? Obviously you're not thrilled with the current system. Is there a way forward, or is this just how things are?
Yeah, you have to think there's a way forward. It is hard to imagine Congress taking some kind of action or getting some kind of champion in Congress who's going to take on philanthropy. It's such a political uphill battle. Like you said, you're going to take flack on the show for saying anything even remotely critical of Bill Gates. So to try and tackle this issue of challenging a wealthy person's ability or constraining their ability to give their money away is tricky. But that's not to say that it can't happen or won't eventually happen. But there's so many other policies out there that are, even a bigger picture. Like, why do we let these billionaires get so rich in the first place? What about a wealth tax, where you're taxing 1%, 2%, or 3% of their assets every year?
Yep.
So forget the income tax, the estate tax, forget all that. But during their lifetimes, every year, if you've got $100 billion, you've got to give $3 billion of that every year to the tax coffers. And once you start more aggressively taxing billionaires and removing these kinds of deductions they get through charity, then all of a sudden you have fewer wealthy people with less wealth. So I think that's a more substantive way to really get at this, at the way that billionaire philanthropists exercise political power.
Right, because look, I would argue our tax code and the changes that Ronald Reagan made during the 80s created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. It was policy that made this choice to have some 650 certified billionaires. To where back, in 1982, I guess it was, when the first Forbes 400 came out, there were only like 2 or 3 in today's dollars. It was our tax dollars that created this and allowed them to do this, because Reagan, aggressively went after the tax code. When he took office, it was 70%. When he left, he dropped it down to 28%. And back in the good socialist days of Dwight David Eisenhower, it was 92% top marginal tax rate. Today, what's it, like 37%?
Yeah.
So that's how we've created this large billionaire class. So it's policy that got us here. I believe it's policy that can get us back. Much like you're saying.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
There you go. Tim, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the article. I hope folks will take a look at it. We'll make sure we get it out on social media so people can. It's Bill Gates' Charity Paradox. It's over at The Nation, written by Tim Schwab. Tim, I appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Rick. Appreciate it.
Good talking with you. I hope you'll come back again real soon. Good stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm getting the kids, telling them to get under the bed. I'm yelling for my wife. She's screaming, the roof coming off, and then the whole roof flew up.
Deadly tornadoes hammer the South, complicating coronavirus emergency response.
This would have been on a store shelf 24 hours from now. but it's not.
Farmers forced to dump fresh milk destroy food crops as coronavirus upends U.S. food system. Plus,
a historic deal, but already big analysts are coming out and saying, look, it's simply insufficient.
Deal reached to cut global oil production.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Nobody is winning at $25 oil.
Well, not nobody, CNBC. I think consumers may be pretty happy about it. But then again, consumers aren't really your interest over there at CNBC, are they? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, on top of a coronavirus pandemic, now we've got to start worrying about storm season.
Indeed we do, and it's already started. At least 32 people have been killed in the South after tornadoes and severe thunderstorms swept across 12 states, from Texas to West Virginia, early Monday morning. The governors of Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi have declared states of emergency over the damage, and that's on top of already declared states of emergency for the coronavirus pandemic. That has strained emergency response capabilities and complicated efforts to prevent the spread of the virus among storm victims forced into community shelters.
And this is something you've been warning about for quite some time, the idea of several different disasters all happening at once in certain places.
Yep, and now we're getting to see how well we respond to multiple disasters simultaneously, or not.
Or not.
The global oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia has ended, for now, with an historic agreement to cut their production starting in May. Oil prices have crashed over the last few months due to the price war, a pre-existing supply glut, and a lack of demand for oil caused by coronavirus shutdowns around the world. The deal means that the OPEC oil cartel and several major oil-producing countries will cut production by nearly 10 million barrels of crude oil per day. That's about 1/10 of world supply, but oil demand itself has dropped 35%. That's why industry analysts warn that this largest oil output cut in history is probably not going to be enough to prop up prices because of that global slump in demand. They warn it likely won't be enough to prevent dozens of U.S. oil producers from going bankrupt.
And it won't prevent the gas prices from continuing to fall.
Right. The coronavirus pandemic has also disrupted the nation's food supply chain. While families are lining up at food banks around the country, the New York Times reports that farmers are being forced to waste staggering quantities of fresh food, dumping perishables like milk, eggs, and vegetables in the trash, and destroying crops due to a crash in demand from large institutional customers like restaurants, hotels, and schools that are closed due to shutdowns. Food banks can safely receive, store, and refrigerate only some of that surplus. Paul Allen of Florida's Hatton Farms told CNN that farmers are struggling to adapt to the abrupt shift in demand.
It's just too massive to handle. You have to understand this is a perishable crop. You know, you're to harvest it on one given day, and you got about a 2-day window to get it harvested. If you don't, then it's bad. It's not frozen, not canned. So it's planted every day, and it's harvested every day, and it's meant to be consumed every day.
The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reports that some Wisconsin dairy farmer groups say the USDA has not yet responded to their request for the federal government to buy and distribute their surplus food. Farmers are also reporting critical shortages of farm workers due to the virus. COVID-19 is also affecting the meat processing industry. The world's biggest pork producer, Smithfield Foods, announced on Sunday it is closing some U.S. plants indefinitely due to the spread of coronavirus among employees. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, firefighters are struggling to control large wildfires that are burning through radioactive forests in the abandoned territory around the destroyed Chernobyl nuclear plant. Greenpeace Russia reports that satellite photos indicate the fires have come within 2 miles of where some dangerous waste from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster is stored. While the smoke does carry some radiation, officials say levels are very low.
Ukrainian officials?
Yes.
Be careful about trusting them.
Finally, some good news. The closure of polluting coal plants has resulted in clear gains for public health. A new study has found that in Lexington, Kentucky, toxic air pollutants dropped 55% after one coal plant closed. Air quality improved so quickly that hospitals in Lexington, Kentucky saw 400 fewer admissions for asthma in the first year after the closures. It's another example of how quickly public health will improve with transitioning away from fossil fuels.
They closed the coal plant and they they had 400 fewer admissions for asthma in 1 year?
Yes. Dramatic.
Yeah, I'll say. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently, they finally decided on the signature on the stimulus checks. The Donald will have his name. And it got me thinking that will some of the Trumpkins not cash the check? You know, will they frame it? Because it's got his signature on it. Because they don't need it. They don't believe in it. They don't believe in the government giving out money. That's socialism. But they do have his signature. So, you know, that would be a frameable item. I say everybody who voted for Trump, you should get the check and frame it. Don't cash it because you don't need the money. Frame it. I think that's the way to go. Now, obviously, look, a lot of people who voted for Trump are in the same boat as everybody else. They're anxious to get the stimulus money so they can pay their bills, they can put food on the table. And I don't begrudge them of that. We're in a horrible time. It just is what it is. But, you know, interestingly enough, as I tweeted out today, you know, did you get your check? Did you get the money deposited into your account? Some people have. And I was shocked at the number of people who actually have. And not surprised when I asked what they are going to use it for. The vast majority said bills, to buy food. One woman shocked me out of, you know, over probably 100 responses. One woman said she's prepaying her cremation. She's 66 years old, and you know, she's worried that, you know, hey, it may happen, and she doesn't want to burden her kids. Just interesting. I guess, would this be under the label interesting times? Sad times. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day, our good friend, former Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So did you get yours yet? Did you get your direct deposit? Did you get your money yet?
No, my daughter did. She called me this morning, so I put out that some people I knew got the check. I did. A friend of mine got a check, and he just doesn't like anything, period, about Trump. So I did call him and told him I want his check since he doesn't like Trump. So I'll take it. I told him.
I don't like Trump either, but here's at the end of the day, the reality is I blame him for the severity of this mess. I think they could have done much more earlier, and it wouldn't have been, I don't believe as bad. You can agree or disagree. But I think had they responded properly right from the start, when all the whistles and the sirens and the blinking lights were going off, I don't think it would have been near as bad as it's been. And fortunately, it isn't as bad as it had been predicted, and that's because we've stayed away from each other.
Yeah, and see now the whole debate over, you know, well, it'll deflect back because Trump will say, you know, China didn't tell us in time. You know, they hid a lot of facts. I've had that debate with a lot of, not a lot, a few friends of mine who said, no, China didn't do anything. And I'm like, no, I know, you know, Trump didn't respond now as fast. We know that, but I try to tell them also China literally held the secret, you know, and I think even went after the whistleblower, you know, so that, then that transcends, and that debate eventually might be a presidential candidate debate, you know, for the fall. I'm not doubting that. But now it goes back to, okay, because, you know, people have been confined. Are we going to open up? And this is becoming interesting. I had calls today. I kind of put out feelers since this started, and I had calls today, and these are not people that are politically, you know, bent in either direction. They're starting to say, well, wait a minute. In fact, I had a couple calls today that shocked me. You know, they didn't say hoax by any stretch of imagination. These are people that wanted everything shut down at first, and now they're saying, wait a minute, the numbers aren't there. Well, yeah, the numbers aren't there because we've had some shelter in place, you know, in most states, but also now, and I use this example today, over at the hospital in Newark, Ohio, where I live, you could have shot a cannonball through the parking lot and not hit anybody. Nobody's going to cardiac rehab. We've had one death in Licking County, and the hospital is prepared for this surge of people, in bodies and things, and it didn't happen. And so now people are saying, well, wait a minute, how come I can't go to my dermatologist? I've had skin cancer. How come I can't get my colon checked? It was supposed to be checked a month ago. Now it's a whole different level of focus of what people are doing and what they're saying, and it's putting pressure. And you've got the debate, as you know. Trump first said it'll reopen when I say it will, and then he started to yield and backtrack to the governors. Governors are getting under heat now, and state legislators are starting to argue about it. So you can see what's going to happen here in phase 2.
No. I mean, Pennsylvania is right in the heart of this because both our House and our Senate just passed Senate Bill 613 to open things up and to override the governor's his stay in place order. Now I'm assuming that he's going to veto it. And they don't have the votes to override it, but this is setting up that campaign issue.
Was it bipartisan?
Oh no! It was strictly partisan lines. But understand, Pennsylvania, the General Assembly here is controlled by Republicans. We have a Democratic governor, but the numbers are heavily Republican.
You know what happened with Pennsylvania, of course, and my home area of Bel Air, Ohio, Belmont County. Our governor said, no, if you're thirsty and you want a drink, you're not going to buy it in Ohio. That actually happened. Yeah, Governor DeWine and Kroger in Bel Air, Ohio. A friend of mine told me she was in line. A young lady from Pennsylvania was buying some things. She went to buy the alcohol, and they said, no, Pennsylvania, no alcohol in Ohio. They're actually doing that. If you're from Pennsylvania or West Virginia, you cannot buy alcohol if you're in the store from Ohio.
Because those states are shut down, and they don't want you crossing the border and traveling for it. It makes perfect sense.
So that's what our governor did.
And he's smart for doing it. And this is the reason that you have someone overseeing all this, and you communicate with each other because people are naturally going to do these things.
Sure. You're right.
And if you're Ohio, you don't want to get what's coming through Pennsylvania because look, the eastern side of Pennsylvania is basically a bedroom community for New York. So you've got, if you're in Monroe County, up in the Northeast or in the Lehigh Valley, down in the South, down the Middle East, or in Philadelphia, you got to worry because you're close.
Right, to New York City, so, or, to New York State, too. But yeah, that's what happened in Ohio, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So let's get to the Trump stuff. The World Health Organization money. Pro, con, I mean, since you brought up the China thing, and look, there are some valid concerns around China not telling the truth, but to be honest, and we've had this conversation a number of times, you don't believe anything China says, in my view.
I never have. Right, you haven't.
But do you defund the World Health Organization because of it?
Well, what he's done, he's placed a hold. So that's what he's done. He's placed a hold on it for 60 to 90 days over how it handled the pandemic. I don't think you put a hold on it at this point in time. Now, he didn't cancel it, but he's put a hold on it, which, he's trying to basically, squeeze it. Its budget for 2018 and 19 was about $6 billion. And, of course, we are the biggest contributor of any country, in the world. And I guess we provided about $500 million per year to the World Health Organization, and China contributes about $40 million a year versus our half a billion dollars. So what he's saying is that he wants full accountability. There's a lot of decisions that can be dangerous or good or bad from the WHO. Now I agree with that, but right now it's not. Yes. We're the largest contributor, so therefore, of the $6 billion, we're going to be, 400 million of it. So, we're the largest contributor. Is it going to stop the World Health Organization from functioning? No, but I think it could be a different message that, when this is done, we're going to assess you. I don't think it should have been done now.
Right.
Why do it now?
Exactly. I mean, you're in the middle of the damn thing.
Throw the threat out there that, hey, when this is all done, we're going to assess what you did or didn't do. But just don't do it right now.
Yeah, I mean, to me right now, this just reeks of of pure political opportunism and trying to shift the blame away from him. Because look, I'm all in favor of hold the WHO accountable. But also, we're not going to let him off the hook for failing to react in a proper amount of time and listen to the people around him, because we're now finding out more that there were, early warnings and there were people screaming saying we needed to be doing something, and he continued to deflect and mock the whole thing.
Yeah, and he goes back to the point he makes where, he was, that people disagreed with him on the Democratic side about shutting off, flights, et cetera, and, you can, I guess, go back and point to some people said, well, we shouldn't do this, but it still is, in my opinion, frankly, honestly, we probably should have shut down every flight like India did, and we didn't. We shut down certain flights. Still 400,000 people came in, as I understand it, from China after we somehow shut things down. So that's going to be debated too.
Right, but here's the thing, and I don't know if you've seen the same stories that I've seen, but evidently the entrance into this country didn't come through China; it came through Europe.
Through Europe, right? And then he closed everything down except Britain. Yeah. Which I never did understand that. I thought, hey, Britain goes too, because
we talked about it.
Right, you and I talked about it, because Britain is still going to be a vehicle for things. So yes, it's going to be all debated of how much did that really do, because the deflection that the White House does, obviously, President, is that, well, wait a minute, I shut down things and they quote, disagreed with it. When in actuality, we really didn't have a complete shutdown.
Yeah, see, I'm with you. I would have shut everything down.
Oh, sure. That's what India did. They just shut everything down. Because if you're going to do it, just do the whole ball of wax. But we didn't do that.
But that also means if you're going to shut everything down, that means you can't then ship all of those people who are down on the southern border that came from Latin America back either. Because now we're finding that some of those people that we ship back took it with them and ended up spreading it in that direction as well. So you can't have cake and eat it too. You can't shut everything down and then start throwing people out.
Right. And so I think at some point in time, it's like the WHO. He could have put out the threat to the WHO instead of having this debated right now. Yeah. If he'd have put out a threat to the WHO, when this is done, we're going to find the truth. Nobody could have objected to that.
No. Because everybody wants accountability. I look, if had he said that, I'd be with you. Because I want to know if we're spending money on an organization that is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I don't trust China even a little bit. So, it's not surprising to me that they withheld stuff and that they lied about the early numbers and all of that stuff. Doesn't surprise me, which means we need leadership in this country that understands that as well.
Well, yes, and that's the big point afterwards. Who's going to do what? I would have loved to see a bipartisan cooperation to go after China and to not just go after them, but to see what we can do to create our own supply chains that we're not dependent on them in medicines and ventilators and everything else under the sun. And I think that's something, that's worth looking at. And of course, we'll see what, who does what afterwards if this subsides. So right now, I think the whole focus is going to be the stimulus checks. I think it's good. It helps people. But the focus will be, on how do you open, when do you reopen, and how's it done? But as you know, the president backtracked from the governors will do what I want, when I want, to where he kind of graciously authorized them to reopen the states. So that was interesting how he backtracked. Okay, I'm going to authorize them to reopen the states. That was his backtrack.
It's crazy. But what's concerning to me also, especially about defunding the World Health Organization, is now, I don't know if you saw the story over at Axios today, where they're pointing out that China's, they're creating their own Chinese version of all of these global institutes. Their Belt and Road Initiative is what they were talking about. And how they have all of these different organizations that are being created underneath that, and what they're saying is the theory of what they're doing is they're trying to shift the balance of power from the U.S. to themselves, which I completely understand trying to do, but also from our leadership's perspective, you got to figure that out.
Right, and China does that. It's creating its own. For example, when it comes to the Dalai Lama, and you say Dalai Lama, and right now the premier of China is going to be shaking his fists because they hate him. But they've already announced. China's announced that it's already got the new Dalai Lama. They've already announced that they're going to have the next one already, even though this one's not deceased. So, I mean, that's China's method of operation, whether it deals with the Dalai Lama or WHO or whatever. They always try to create, the mousetrap that puts them in control, and that's where we are just going to have to be smarter. Not that it's going to be a Cold War of us versus China. I think it's more of us surviving and, building a better mousetrap, which we haven't done, obviously, with China for, 24 years.
Well, because we've allowed our greed and our self-centeredness to take over. I mean, people say that, we got to bring manufacturing back. And, this has been going on for, 20 years. We've been handing over our manufacturing prowess for the last 2 decades, all in the hopes of higher short-term profits. And people like you and me have been complaining this entire time, going, you can't give away your manufacturing base. You can't give away your productive capacity and remain a superpower. You just cannot do it.
I pulled up the votes just yesterday to refresh my memory because, I used to do press conferences and coordinating events with Bernie Sanders and Dennis Kucinich, and, I can name on and on.
Right.
The late Congressman LaTourette from Cleveland. We had this bipartisan coalition. And I can remember people like David Dreyer of California, Republican, who came to me and said, well, Bob, we've lost jobs, so we need a trade bill. I said, well, you lost jobs because you had trade bills, and now you need another trade bill because you lost jobs, then you have another trade bill. I said, isn't it evident that you lost jobs, so the first trade bill didn't work? They never saw that, and we've had the final vote, and we lost on permanent trade status. So, now is the opportunity with the will of the people. And by the way, when I was in office, I used to say part of it is our own greed.
Yep.
We wanted the cheaper car, and of course, China, provided such cheap products. Well, they're not cheap anymore. Once they take us away from the market and they destroy the American manufacturer, they take the price right up there.
Yeah,
That's
but here's
exactly
the other part
what
of
they've
this.
done.
The other part of this is, they make junk. I mean, today my wife and I went for a bike ride, and we pulled out the bike pump, and it's made in China and it's crap. I had one for years, made here in the U.S., made out of metal. You pump it, top to bottom, it was pushing air. This thing only about a quarter of the push down actually produced air because it was that shoddily made. And it comes back to, it may have been cheap on the front end, but it's still crap.
It's crap, and then the crap is raised to the regular price of what. Once they put the manufacturer from America out of business, they got you. Then they raised that crap to full price. Dennis Kucinich and I, former Congressman Kucinich and I went to Cambridge, Ohio, and we got all the safety hygiene products they allowed us to state. We had Easter baskets that were pulled off the shelves that had dead formaldehyde stuffed chickens in them. In the Easter baskets to kids, they had long metal steel rods in play toys for kids. And of course, we all remember how they brought the lead-based paint on toys into America. I mean, it's endless. But you know what? Everybody just turned their head to it.
Not to mention the melamine in the baby formula.
Right, and then they were poisoning pets.
Yep, with the melamine. I mean, it was the stuff that they were putting in the pet food to I guess, to thicken it or to keep it, to bind it together. Only it's a carcinogen; it'll kill you. It's exactly what they were putting in the baby formula.
Right.
It's crazy. So let me ask you, because then it comes back to the last line of questioning I got for you, because obviously it's now Trump and Biden, and a couple of endorsements today. You got President Obama, who endorsed, and kind of way too late, but Elizabeth Warren finally came around to endorsing Biden, which thoughts?
Well, on the endorsements, I've been asked about this, and I always quote the late Governor James A. Rhodes of Ohio. He endorsed Reagan, if I recall right, about 2 days before the election. He was Republican governor. And they said, Governor, why did you wait so late? And he said, well, yesterday would have been too early and tomorrow too late. And so when you look at Elizabeth Warren, it's sort of like that. I mean, President Obama comes out, what was Warren going to do? Well, I'm still holding out. So, so she came forth and endorsed him. I thought Obama's endorsement was amazing. I mean, I watched the whole
10
video
minutes?
3 times. I mean, I thought it was an amazing endorsement of him. And I still think that they are going to have to work definitely with Warren and Sanders to keep the base, stirred towards Biden, because the stats show 15% of Sanders' people that support him will most likely go to Trump. So what they have to do is, continuously, I think, have conversations about where Biden will be on certain issues, and then there's going to be yielding to the Democratic platform. Not the Democrat or Republican platforms at the end of the day. I mean, I've been to conventions, you have. But, it still is a kind of important piece to get the candidates to support. So it's going to require unity, and it's going to require, beyond, I endorse them, to some action and activity. Heavy. Big time.
The reason her waiting this long was the reason that I didn't originally support her as my number one. When she had the moment of power, when she had the ability to actually be an influencer, she didn't. And to me, that's that kind of decision making makes my decision for me.
Well, and you're right, because look, especially if Bernie Sanders could come out and support him, it should have been instant.
Yep.
Instant.
Yeah. So on that front, since now I had held out a very, very small, infinitesimal amount of hope that Biden might pick her for VP. I don't see that anywhere close to possible at this point. I now see today you got Stacey Abrams, who's pushing herself out. The woman who said you never run for number 2. So it looks like she's running for number 2, saying that she would be an excellent running mate.
Right. And I still think right now, of course, Klobuchar is I think has got to be on top of the heap there. Kamala Harris, but I still will go back to Klobuchar, and also now there's a lot of talk about the governor of Michigan.
Right. Which I think would be a great choice, because she actually won a statewide election in Michigan. That could help.
I think it would help a lot. Klobuchar or Kamala Harris. Look, Biden's going to do great in California.
Yep.
Kamala Harris brings some other things to the ticket with, African American. But then again, Klobuchar is female, and so is Kamala Harris, and the governor of Michigan, which it has to be. It has to be a female. Would have to be there. So I think it's going towards Klobuchar or the governor of Michigan.
So no chance that it's going to be AOC, because evidently there was a meeting between AOC and Biden. Any chance of AOC?
No.
Okay.
AOC would be,
the worst. It would be a bad choice.
Yeah, charismatic, dynamic, etc. But let's face it, this is the first year. You know how the press did. They followed her around, and they kind of dropped her like a hot potato, because that's what the press does.
Yep.
And so she has a following, but then the press would, the press is the press.
There you go.
With either party at the end of the day, in a lot of ways.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Bob, I appreciate the time, as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, thank you.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Nag. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that the American Federation of Teachers was founded at a meeting at the City Club in downtown Chicago. 3 Chicago teachers groups helped to organize the meeting. They were convinced that in order to improve working conditions for teachers, they would need to formally join the labor movement. In 1902, the Chicago Teachers Federation had become the first teachers organization in the nation to join their Central Labor Council. unsettled. Now they believed it was time to form a national organization. The meeting was also attended by representatives from nearby Gary, Indiana, as well as New York City, Washington, D.C., and Scranton, Pennsylvania. Just a few weeks after the meeting, the American Federation of Teachers had received its charter from the American Federation of Labor. The new union grew quickly. Within 4 months, 174 locals approached membership of 10,000 educators. But then came a backlash from school boards who did not want to negotiate with the new unions. Board members publicly called into question whether it was appropriate for teachers to unionize. The American Federation of Teachers numbers fell to below 5,000. But the union was not swayed from their cause. They renewed their efforts and again began to grow. In the 1950s, some teachers became the targets of anti-communist hysteria. This highlighted the importance of having a union to protect academic freedom. The 1960s was a time of increased teacher actions and strikes. The American Federation of Teachers more than tripled its membership from 60,000 to 200,000 by the end of the decade. Today, the American Federation of Teachers represents more than 1 million members across the nation. While under increasing attacks, teachers are an important force in today's national labor movement.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
So what would you think of a presidential talk radio program? What do you think of the Donald, flipping on the mic every day from noon to 2? Evidently, that was a possibility that was brought up in the Situation Room during this crisis. I can't make this up. This isn't even, I didn't think that he would even go this far, but evidently, part of his shtick, because we know he loves the rallies. He loves that, that opportunity to spread the to use a Bush frame to catapult the propaganda. Evidently, he had really thought about it. He had gone in and, said, hey, what do you think about doing this? And it would give me the opportunity to talk directly to the people. And, it'd be, the phone lines would be wide open and anybody could call, which is a giant pile of BS. If they did it, it would just be like right-wing talk radio where everybody is screened and half the time they pay the people to call in and with the perfect pitch voice and the perfect question without the stuttering, without the stammering, without the unused words that we normally use. Evidently, the staff people, the advisors, had no idea how to respond to it. And ultimately, he backed out of it because, well, he didn't want to compete with Rush Limbaugh, which, then you look into, the fact that, and now it's all starting to play. You go back to the State of the Union address where he gives Limbaugh the Presidential Medal of Freedom during the address. So you're kind of looking at all of this stuff going, is all of this stuff playing out? He decides, hey, I'm going to have a talk radio show. No, I don't want to compete with Rush. Hey, I should give him a medal. And you start thinking about how the decision-making process works. Scary as hell. Oh, my goodness. But that's our guy. That's our Donald. But would you've listened? I mean, a lot of people listen to Rush and the rest of them, expose the propaganda and come up with their conspiracy theories. Would you listen to the Donald? I think I might a little bit, just for laughs. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.